Welcome, comrades and workers from Scotland and elsewhere. We're in for a treat. Thank you for clicking on to this link. This is my first ever live stream through my own YouTube channel. Of course, I've been a co-host for Dust James's Working Class Revolt for a long time. But this is the first time doing it through my own live stream, and we're in for a treat. This is going to be a massive, very strong start, hopefully, because I'm joined with Comrade George here, who's a fellow Scottish communist, fellow Scottish comrade, and we're just going to have a general conversation about Scottish independence. And just to show that it's a kind of a relaxed kind of chat, I've just got a nice glass of scotch. Just going to have a nice kind of friendly conversation. And just show people out there that two people with differing views can just actually come together and speak to each other. We don't have to cancel each other and block people. We can just actually sit down and have a normal conversation like adults should do, especially communists. So, without further ado, I'll just get George to introduce himself and just to tell us a little bit about himself.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. It's nice sunny day here, so I'm just sitting taking in some of the nice weather. So my name's George. For all legal intents and purposes on Facebook, you can just keep calling me Georges, that's fine. I'm 34, electrician, 2 kids. And I wouldn't say I'm quite the Scottish nationalist that would be portrayed, some of the more aggressive people, but I'm a person that views independence a bit differently from my comrades here, and we're just going to sit and have a wee chat about it, and all will be well, I'm sure. We're not going to end up having to meet halfway between Dundee and Glasgow and sort it out.
No, I don't think it leads to that. I think we're just going to. No, I think you'd win that.
I don't know. Depends.
I think you'd win there anyway. All good. Yeah, no, that's kind of the thing that really gets me. That's one of the biggest problems I have with Scottish independence. Just how openly anti-English and quite aggressive the SNP is. That's kind of my main thing. So I'm glad that you made that clear, that you're not one of those kind of aggressive nationalists that think that England are the enemy and stuff. I'm glad you made that clear.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't. I don't think anything good starts with that other country, other ethnic group, other this, that, or next thing is just the enemy, and we must fight this enemy. You know, it leads to a lot of bad things. I think in history will tell us that. So we should obviously err away from such things, and that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, 100%. So yeah, like I said, me and George are both Scottish comrades. We're from different regions. I'm more northern and he's more southern, but it doesn't really matter. So we might have a difference of accent. That's all good. A lot of Americans usually understand me anyway. I have a pretty weak Scottish accent, so no problem at all. I know the Glaswegian accent is more.
I'll try and slow down my speech. I'll try and slow down my speech a wee bit, because sometimes I go into the pure Glasgow twang. So we'll try and keep that at a minimum so that I'm at least understandable.
Yes, no problem. No problem. So just a little bit of context before we actually get into kind of more fiery discussions about Scottish independence in general. Just some context to help people understand how important this issue is. There's no doubt about it. Undoubtedly, Scottish independence is probably the most controversial, the most divisive issue in Scotland right now. And it's not only carving divides between the English and the Scottish, it's also carving divides within Scotland as well, as lots of people, obviously, with different viewpoints are splitting each other up over this. It's very, very divisive.
Even within families.
Yeah, even within families, there's been lots of arguments within families, especially in the 2014 general election. There was lots and lots of family infighting and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's hugely important for Scotland to be allowed to speak about these kind of things. And one thing that always annoys me is the Americans that say, like, I don't know if you've experienced the same thing, but a lot of Americans that I know are kind of obsessed with like genealogy, and they always like, oh well, I'm 12% Scottish, so I should have an opinion on Scottish independence, and it's like, well, I mean, you're not, you're American.
yeah, a lot of the folk over that came on for like the reuniting of the clans and stuff like that. I mean, it is undoubted that certainly during the early years, what would you call it? Settlements from Europeans into America. Certainly the massive majority was Scottish and English. Maybe some Welsh and stuff like that. The Irish didn't really start coming over there a wee bit later. The Poles, the Germans, etc. But yeah, for that first kind of part of America's history when people started moving over, it certainly was a massive Scottish population. I dare say there's still massive swathes of America that's got some sort of Scottish genealogy. Yeah, wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that was the first wave of immigration to America. It was the WASPs, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
That's right.
So it was the Norwegians, the Swedish, and the Icelandic, the Dutch, the French, the Germans, and obviously the Scottish and English. Those were the first wave of immigration. So it makes sense that even today, millions and millions of Americans will have connections, ancestral connections to Scotland. No doubt about that at all. But I just think it's kind of weird how they think that they're allowed to have such a strong opinion, and it's like, you haven't lived here for a very long time. Like, you don't know the current material situation in Scotland. I think you should just let the Americans kind of fight amongst themselves about it and not let the Americans kind of talk about it too much. But I think
certainly it was such a big talking point. It wasn't as if the US president himself, Barack Obama, wasn't over doing speeches and holding court, if you like. So it was very much a worldwide news. I remember, I'll actually tell you a funny wee story. I was in Sarajevo the day the vote came in. I voted by post because I knew I was going on holiday. So I was in Sarajevo the moment the morning the vote was announced. My Estonian girlfriend at the time, we'd both sent away our postal ballots because she was allowed to. She'd lived and worked here for at least 5 years.
Okay, yeah.
And even the people, when we went to the zoo and all that in Sarajevo and the coffee shops and all that, could obviously very easily tell I was Scottish with wearing some Scottish paraphernalia. And everybody would ask you about it. People that you wouldn't think would be remotely interested walking through the streets of Sarajevo and then Belgrade a few days later, the amount of questions by every amount of people was unreal. So it was a big issue, and it was certainly something that was worldwide coverage.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I've got another story. Like yourself, you were in former Yugoslavia. My friends from Australia, David Fox, he was on a hiking trip in I think Malaysia or Indonesia, hiking up one of the tallest mountains there, and it was the day of the independence referendum, and even on top of the summit, there was maybe 200 people who'd made it to the summit, and one of the people there was just an Indonesian native, and they asked David Fox, "Oh, I wonder what the results for the Scottish independence referendum will be." Yeah. And it just shows like they were on top of this very remote, desolate village in like very, very rural parts of Indonesia. Literally could not be further away from Scotland geographically. Yeah. And they were like, "Oh, I wonder what the independence referendum will be like." It was of such international importance. It's crazy.
I felt as if I never spoke about anything else for a year and a half. And the lead up to it, now you're talking about obviously, so 2014 was 8 years ago. But I mean, for the year leading up to it, whether it was on Facebook or talking in the pub, talking in your work, talking in your family circle, talking in your friend circle, I felt as if it was the only thing anybody spoke about, certainly. And it was for quite a substantial period of time, even after the fact it was then this is what's happening, and then it's all the hubris of right, what happens next, and we've all fell out with each other, so what then goes to the, you know what I mean? No, honestly, it was quite the experience.
That seems to be a thing in Britain or Scottish kind of culture. We just like talking about things, the same thing for a very long time. Scottish independence was kind of one of the first things, and then obviously Brexit. 3 or 4 years, that's literally all the media fucking talked about was Brexit and how shit the negotiations were going. And then now with COVID, that's literally all we talked about for like 3 years, which is a COVID-19, the pandemic. It seems to be a general theme in Britain. I don't know if you've experienced the same stuff.
Well, I certainly, unfortunately, I did. My uncle at the very start died of COVID, so
Mm,
it was really, and that's so that was a really big thing. Um, Obviously, he ended up in a ventilator and stuff like that, and they didn't
yeah.
manage to pull through. So that was certainly a shockwave, certainly that I kind of experienced firsthand. So, and I'm sure many other people did as well. So it was quite something. I think the only thing people talk more about than COVID in the past 3 years because we're Scottish is football. That's about the only other thing we'll consistently talk about. Talk the hind legs off a donkey about that forever.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. No, yeah. I'm sorry to hear about your loss. I was on the shielding list during the pandemic because I was going through cancer treatment. So I was literally
Mhm.
not allowed to leave the house. Like lots of people were still getting to go out, like to work and like to for exercise, and like I wasn't even allowed to do that. I had a garden luckily, so I was allowed to maybe nip out to the
Mhm.
garden for fresh air and stuff. Um, during the summer. But yeah, I mean, just my life then was just evolving around treatment, so I was not
Yeah.
allowed to literally leave for months and months and months. I thought I was going to go insane, but it just shows. Yeah, I mean, even now, I think the death um, stats. I don't like to call them stats because they're human beings we're talking about here. But I think it's about 200,000 people died from COVID-19. Um, and one of the highest occupations where lots of people, the highest proportion died was obviously healthcare workers who
Mhm.
were not given the right PPE, were not given the right protection, were completely underfunded and stuff. So
Yeah.
disgraceful
That was
treatment
that
of
was
human beings.
that was scandalous. I remember at the time when they were wearing bin bags and stuff like that
Bin
because they
bags,
couldn't
yeah,
manage to get
wearing
any
bin
PPE.
bags.
You know what I mean? Like I'm like, how in the name of you know what? We're a supposedly rich country and we've got nurses wearing bin bags because we can't get proper PPE put in place. Just shows
Yeah,
how that's funnily enough, not to make it that way, but you know that's one of the things that goes. You know, how can we be so inefficient? And if it's the Parliament in London that's the problem with this high level inefficiency, surely there's got to be a better way of dealing with that at a more local or whatever level. So I don't know.
so would you say that the COVID pandemic actually kind of helped you become more in support of Scottish independence,
I wouldn't say it
seeing
was any more.
the inefficiency of the Westminster?
Yeah, but that's always been there. So I suppose it wasn't anything that made me feel stronger because I already felt that way about Westminster
All
and
right,
the
okay.
way it's very inefficient at dealing with things. But it was just another point that hammered it home.
It just gave you
Um,
another reason.
just gave me another reason, basically. Aye,
Yeah.
that's basically what it is.
All right, that makes sense. Yeah, definitely. So, just kind of for some clarification and to kind of understand where you're coming from. So, you do identify as a communist?
Yes,
All right, cool.
yes.
And can you what are the specifics? Like, are you like kind of a Marxist-Leninist or a kind of
I, I,
Maoist or whatever?
I wouldn't say I was a Maoist. I would say I'm definitely more Marxist-Leninist.
All right.
I seem to see a lot of. I was turned off to the Maoists a wee bit because obviously China having the success that it's having, and all they ever say is, oh, well, Mao would have done this and Mao would have done that, and Deng did this and they did that. And I'm like, right, okay, but Mao's not here anymore.
Yeah.
And what you've got is a very efficient socialist country with Chinese characteristics, as they would call it.
Yeah.
So and it's going to be the biggest bulwark coming into the next few years against like the global imperialists. So you know, take your small victories where you can get them, and stop trying to be so purified about everything, because that's the way the anarchists kind of tend to act, and that's what
Yeah.
sometimes I go like, the Maoists are a wee bit like anarchists, this utopian nonsense, if you know what I mean.
No, I definitely agree with that about China, 100%. I read a book recently. It was The World According to Xi, and it was written by an author called Kerry Brown, who lived in China
Mhm.
for maybe 10 to 15 years. And yeah, she kind of said exactly what you said. She said that the Chinese Communist Party now currently don't really refer to Maoist theoretical teachings that much. They are
Mhm.
obviously more scientifically socialist. And
Yeah,
the Communist Party of China have funded massive propaganda campaigns actually discouraging people from buying into like kind of historical dogmatism.
yeah,
Like, oh, well, fuck what's happening now. What would have Mao said? And obviously, Mao wasn't here when
yeah,
the technology that exists now
yes,
was a thing. So it's impossible to predetermine what Mao would have thought about things now.
Yeah. Well,
And a big
absolutely.
theme, a big theme in the book was about the modernization of Chinese with socialism and Chinese characteristics.
Yeah.
So even that's not good enough. So not only Maoism isn't good enough now for the for the Communist Party of China, socialism with Chinese characteristics also is kind of quite outdated. It's kind of dates back to like the Deng theory and Deng thought and stuff, Dengist thought. So now they're rejuvenating even that and turning it into like the modernization of socialism and Chinese characteristics. Like they're going even further than that. So yeah.
Well, I mean, what they forget is China went for a country completely dominated by the Western powers. I mean, I'm sure you'll have seen how they planned to carve up China after World War II. Had they been allowed to do that, you might have had a Dutch China, Japanese China, all that kind of thing. They were planning to carve the place up, and they've went from that to then obviously there was famines, but China historically has suffered for famines since time immemorial. So the fact that they've went from having a famine all the time, like every 5 years, for hundreds of years in their history, and major famines at that, to now they've not had anything of the sort since the Communist Party's taken charge. It's the modernisation is. I compare it sometimes to, like, for example, you get a Dubai, and if you look at pictures for 1990, it's a strip of land in the desert with nothing in it.
Yes.
To what it is now. So you can imagine a completely agrarian society to what China is now, which is the best of services, the best of tech, best of trains, best of infrastructure. To think that you could have, if Mao thought that China could have had that 40 years, 50 years down the line, I'm sure he wouldn't really be that peeved by it. So that's just my
100%.
So,
yeah, no, definitely. It's absolutely an inspiration to see what how China has progressed, and it's one of the biggest differentiates of distinguishing what is a real comrade nowadays and what isn't. If people can still look at China and criticize it and openly, like, actually put energy into their life to criticize it and to fight against it, it just shows that they completely lack Marxist analysis and just aren't real materialists. Because even though China might not have full socialism, they even admit that themselves. They aim to be they aim to be in the first stage of socialism by 2050. So they're still they know themselves they're way off actually becoming even socialist. They know that. But if you look at a materialist perspective, what countries do what in the international kind of stage? China is absolutely a force for good and advances the working class globally, and is obviously one of the strongest fighters against American unipolarism and hegemony, which is obviously has spent the last few centuries just carving up the world and destroying entire races off the face of the planet. And I just want to say, before I let you speak again, just say hi to Dust. Dust has commented saying hi, y'all. Hey, Dust, thanks for being here. I appreciate you watching. But anyway, so yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the biggest things that really kind of helped me as a guide that who really I should take seriously when interacting with people. It's their opinion on China. That's one of the most kind of pivotal points. It's kind of taking people seriously, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of the ones as well where it's any lie pumped out by the Western media, aka being fed to them by whatever spy agencies, the Five Eye intelligence agencies, feed this line, feed this line, feed this line. Like, for example, the genocide against Uyghurs, and then you're like, what genocide? Their numbers have went through the roof. Oh, well, they move Han Chinese
population.
Aye, and they move in Han Chinese. All right, so you're saying that they're moving people that live in the country to a different part of the country. All right, okay, that's how horrid. Oh yeah, one must clutch at my pearls at the very thought of people moving internally to different parts of their country so that they can get on with the process of turning Xinjiang into what a lot of the rest of China's like, with infrastructure and at the end of the day, there's no culture being erased. They're actively encouraged. In fact, on the Chinese currency, you'll find multiple languages on various bits of Chinese currency.
Yeah, exactly.
Represent the languages of a lot of different people, including the Tibetans, Uyghurs, etc. So, yeah, it's at this point I can't really take you seriously if you're constantly buying these lines that are being fed. I mean, you really should know better. I mean,
Yeah.
this has been done over and over and over again in different situations, and to still be buying it, and to still be buying what America's saying after the strew of lies all the way for the end of the war, it's
Precisely,
unbelievable.
yes. So
So
okay, so you're a communist. You're more closely aligned with Marxism Leninism. That's awesome, and you're pro China, I'd say.
yes,
One last little bit of an introduction. We're already 20 minutes in, so I do want to start actually talking about Scotland. But
yes,
just one last
absolutely.
question. What's your kind of take on the Russia Ukraine situation? That's obviously a big thing in international news right now. So just
Uh,
what's your take on that?
Well, unfortunately, it's not as if I'm Putin's biggest fan. I mean, there's no way anybody could accuse me of that. But however, the Soviet Union were promised we will not spread 1 inch west of east of Berlin. Oh, that's great. So you're not going to spread further and further. Now they've got 13 countries past uh,
Hmm.
Berlin. So they've broken every promise under the book. And I think for the Baltics, and then they're going to admit a lot of the countries that are surrounding Serbia for obvious reasons. And I think just Ukraine was the one where it was like, no, absolutely not. If we don't fight back against this now, that's us. We're completely hemmed in. If we give up that bit of the world to Western influence, then how much more can we possibly take? So he's made a decision to go in, protect the Russian people, and potentially, obviously, kick out the puppet regime that's been there since 2014.
Hmm.
And war's never good. War should be avoided at all costs. But there just comes a time where no, if something's got to be done, and if this is the time to do it, then unfortunately this is what's going to happen. So that's my view on it.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, that's really fantastic stuff. I completely share your analysis there, and I just think it's ironic that I was written. I was reading a Guardian article from about 2014, and they were writing about their worries about the neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine. This was an
That's right.
article from about 2014, and I was like, "Oh, Ukraine and its white supremacist problem."
Mhm.
And that whole article was just saying that there's neo-Nazi organizations which have high power positions, and they're
Yep.
infiltrated in the government, and they influence and they influence kind of Ukrainian political
Yep.
decision
Yep.
making. And there's just a bunch of Nazis and white supremacists, and then that's all forgotten about now. And the
Yep.
second Russia finally stepped in, I mean, I think they should have done it a long time ago. The
I
Communist
totally
Party of
agree.
the Russian Federation have been calling for intervention against the Nazis in Ukraine for over 10 years now, or
Yep.
even probably even longer than that. So they finally stepped in, and now the Guardian articles have all been kind of pretty much erased. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh my God, the Russians have the Russians have invaded this random victimized kind of innocent country that was just
Yeah.
minding its own business. It's like
Yep.
absolute nonsense. There's
Mhm.
decades of context here. This isn't a
Yep.
random spontaneous invasion. This dates back from kind of the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact and all of the
Yep.
different kind of ethnicities and stuff getting their own nations. And I think Putin said that in one of his speeches. That was one of his biggest criticisms of Lenin, was he was too obsessed with giving everybody their own nation.
Yeah.
And now that the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact has collapsed, there's all of these different groups now that are within the ex-republics that maybe want their own independence now because
Yeah.
Lenin said we can. And I just think
Well,
he should have probably spent less time fixating on who gets what land and actually building kind of
yeah.
socialism. But I mean, obviously I 100% support Lenin, but I just think I do agree with that kind of
Yeah.
criticism that he was a bit obsessed with like, oh, this group gets their own nation, and it's like, just why don't we just focus on what's actually important here, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Absolutely. And constantly handing over basically to ethno states again is I don't feel is a very good idea. Yugoslavia. I mean, the countries of the former Yugoslavia haven't had much success in terms of the way the countries have been run, just because
yeah,
you split them up into this many places. Now, obviously, the Republic Spritska in Bosnia wants to go its own way. So you've already got a tiny country in Bosnia, and you're going to cut that into a third. There's Croatia, Slovenia, Montenegro, and it's like, right, okay, how many more do you want exactly?
yeah.
So,
It's
but
like
anyway,
hyper balkanization of
yes.
already fairly small geographical region. It doesn't make much sense really.
Well, it's different. For example, like in America, if like Texas or California, for example, wanted to go their own way, they're large swathes of land, very economically successful. But I don't see how it benefits anybody to just start breaking everything apart all the time. Like, see, for example, when I said about the Scottish independent question at 2014, I said, do you know, if you would just give full federalisation, I could live with that. If it was to be like the UK Parliament would turn around and say, right, okay, full federalisation, but we're still Great Britain, I probably could have gotten bored with that. I probably still could. But
Okay, yeah.
that's never been given serious consideration. So then your one becomes it's then weighted to two sides rather than having a viable third option that you could go
Yeah.
right. Okay, well, I don't want to break apart that bad that I wouldn't take full federalisation, if you know what I mean. So
So you'd probably support the Communist Party of Britain, the CPB policy of progressive federalism, which is pretty
yes,
much that they are against full independence for Wales and Scotland, but they do want like pretty much maximum devolution,
yeah,
and they think that Scotland should be in control of every single thing that would only affect Scottish affairs,
yeah,
like maximum devolution. So on issues that will really only affect Scotland anyway, then Scottish people should be able to have that say themselves as a people, but then still kind of be a part of the socialist kind of federative
well,
socialist
and that's
republic.
exactly it, and that's what worked with the Soviet Union. You had
Yeah,
Soviet
it's Soviet
republics,
style
and
socialism.
they did have massive leeway to make decisions within their Soviet republic, independent of the central committee, in large amounts of things. So it worked pretty well for them. Obviously, the downfall of the Soviet Union and all that's a discussion for another day. But something like that can work. And obviously, we know the outside forces that were involved in that. So
Yeah,
it wasn't necessarily because people wanted this, people wanted that. It was outside forces. But anyway, that's a topic for another day.
yeah. Honestly, so yeah, I think 20 half an hour in on it almost. I think we should just wrap up the introduction. So yeah, you're a Scottish communist, Marxist-Leninist, pro-China, and you do have a kind of an ML analysis on the Russian-Ukrainian war, and yeah, so that's really that's good. So I'm just going to ask you quite blatantly, just what are some reasons why you are supportive of Scottish independence? I know you've already mentioned a few, but just to start off the conversation about the Scottish question, what are some reasons why you are in support of Scottish
Yeah.
independence?
Well, I mean, I suppose the main reason that started it all off was the way the voting works. So, first past the post system gives it doesn't represent very well. So basically, you could have 40,000 votes in an area, 20,000 of them the majority, or say even 15,000 of them, which is not a majority of the place, but that's the majority won by the first candidate, and then all the rest of the votes are away because it's been split amongst different smaller factions. And obviously, England holding the massive, I mean, it's obviously got more land, it's got a bigger population. So if you go
Yeah,
and treat it as one country, then obviously the bigger parts of the country, which there is differences, I think even English and Scottish people would acknowledge were quite different in a lot of ways. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think if you travel south of the border extensively, as I've been many places, you can tell the difference in the way that people think and the way they want to live their lives, stuff like that, which is fine and dandy. So I was always right. So the Tories keep getting in, but Scotland keeps voting Labour in on mass.
hmm
So if it was something like right, okay, some sort of committee, like maybe Scotland would have like a House of Representatives. There you go for like the people in America. So each state, regardless of size or population, gets the same two senators. So that there's never the way that was thought out when it was created was there'd be no dictatorship of the majority. So each state had its two senators, equal
yeah,
voice within the Senate. So something like that would be more appropriate. But that was one of the big things was the way England could basically decide elections. If England decided on an election, the other three countries, if you want to call them that, within the United Kingdom have to go with what that one country wants, and it's basically a dictatorship of the majority. when it's taken that way. So that was probably the main and the biggest reason when I got started thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, first past the post is first past the post is an inherently very unfair electoral system compared to the other ones. I mean, you can have proportional representation, or like in Scotland, AMS, the additional member system, and obviously a council level. We have STV, the transitional.
Yep.
What's it called again? Single transferable vote.
Single transferable vote. Yeah.
Yeah. So for Americans, I won't lecture you on what the functionalities of those different electoral systems. I'd bore you to death. But first past the post is the electoral system for the general UK elections. First past the post, and pretty much the idea is the party that gets the biggest percentage gets to win. And the reason why that's not fair is that technically you could have a situation, and often do have a situation, that the vast majority of the country voted for parties that didn't win the biggest number of votes. So say if the Conservative Party won 45% of the vote, that means that 55% of people didn't vote Conservative. But through first past the post, the Conservatives will win almost probably a majority, because that's just how the seats and the translation happens. So it's very, very unfair. So I understand your analysis of if Scotland continues and consistently votes for Labour or the SNP, well, yeah, we get maybe 20, 30 seats out of 650, and the Conservatives in England, because they have a bigger population, can just pretty much veto us and completely outnumber us electorally.
And certainly they've got to. And it's not a bad thing. They've got to work for their biggest constituency. Their biggest constituency is indeed England, or massive swathes of England. So what they're going to do at the national level will be decisions made for their biggest constitution, and probably not having the deference to the other three nations and how that would affect them negatively.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, because, like I said, there's 650 seats, and I think about 570 are English, or English seats. So that is the vast majority. And like you said, Scotland, England has pretty much voted Liberal, Democrat, or Conservative, and Scotland has pretty much voted Labour or SNP. So it's not really fair. If we are to view these two nations as equally important nations, politically, then we shouldn't have a situation where the English working class, or the English voters, are always getting what they want and who they vote for. But Wales, who obviously Wales has a Labour stronghold, they're also never really heard. It's either Labour or Plaid Cymru, which is the Welsh Independence Party. Plaid Cymru. I completely share your analysis. It's not very fair. First past the post definitely has its huge disadvantages. What would you say about the kind of proposal of maybe changing first past the post, while still having Scotland and Wales a part of the United Kingdom? Would you support that? Like, I think George Galloway is a massive advocate for proportional representation, and he's obviously the head of the Workers' Party of Britain, which had a membership of about 5,000 to 7,000 people. And they have quite high vote percentages at council levels. When they have by-elections and stuff in English working class industrial cities, the Workers' Party of Britain do get like a lot of votes on a council level, and I think the Workers' Party of Britain would very easily get quite a few seats in Parliament if we did have proportional representation. I just want to kind of have your thoughts on that.
And this is me saying as well, as no fan of UKIP, right? But if you remember right, there was one of the elections where they won, I think, about 3 million votes, which is a lot of votes. And all they got out of it was one seat. Now, I'm not a fan of UKIP, but you could see how that would then further disillusion the 3 million people that voted for them, because then they go, oh, well, wait a minute, 3 million of us voted and all we've got to show for it is one seat. Because maybe they had massive votes in certain areas where they were nip and tuck, but the Tories or Labour maybe just edged them. And that happened in a lot of situations. So it's definitely something that's not just even coming from a Scottish perspective, it's just coming from the perspective of a bit better democracy.
Definitely. I mean, I'll give you another example to actually help your point. The Green Party too usually gets the same amount of votes as UKIP.
That's right.
They usually get 2.5 to 4.5 million votes per general election. And I think in Westminster, the Green Party maybe have 4 or
Couple
5
of seats.
seats. I think they have 2 or
Aye,
3 now. Actually, they lost a few. So
they did.
they had. So we have a population of about 70 million, 65 million.
Yep.
3 million people vote for the Green Party, but yet they only have maybe 2 or 3 seats in Parliament. So that is completely unfair. Yeah, I mean, I completely understand that. Is there any other major reasons why you support independence, or can I kind of talk a little bit about why I'm
Yeah,
against it?
the other one's probably completely selfish in terms of the amount of resources for such a small population. So, not saying that any of these places that I'm about to mention are perfect, or far from it, but you've got countries with big oil reserves, lots of natural resources that use it to their own benefit. Again, like I say, Dubai was just a strip in the desert. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and stuff like that, places like that, Norway, they've got far, far better things to show for it than what, for example, Scotland does, which has so much of the water in the UK. In fact, almost all of it. It's got about 70% of the tidal power in the whole EU. Gas, oil, obviously whiskey, the stuff that we export. Plus, we do get a lot of tourism. I'm sure there's a lot of Americans that like to come to Scotland. It seems to be a popular tourist destination for a lot of Americans that I tend to meet in my travels, even just in Scotland. And I just feel that it is because of Westminster, aka, unfortunately, I'm not saying obviously this is like an ethnic thing, but obviously England, as we discussed, having such the majority, I don't feel that they're using these things to benefit us up here in Scotland. And that then becomes a sticking point, it becomes an issue, and it becomes a point of contention.
Yeah, no, yeah, I definitely get your point of tourism. I mean, I think every time I've been to Edinburgh, I think about
Yeah,
75% of the people that come up to speak to me are either English or American, not
yeah.
actually native people from Edinburgh or even Scotland.
It's
The
a
vast
beautiful place
majority.
to visit. I've got nothing against that. You know, it's a nice place to come. So
Oh yeah,
they
I mean
certainly should
Scotland.
come here and enjoy their time.
Yeah, no, definitely, 100%. So yeah, with that being said, do you think that Scotland would survive economically if it was an independent nation? Because I heard an article the other day that was actually a massive rebuttal of the 2014 rhetoric from Alex Salmond that we have the huge oil reserves in the North Sea, and it's just that we're weeks away from finding massive amounts, and we did find it. They were right that it was there. But I read an article the other day that said that 98% of all of that oil is owned by European private companies. And I said
Yes,
that only 2% of the profit made from those oils are actually
you would need
redistributed
to.
back into the
That's
Scottish
when you would need
government.
to.
So I
That's when
mean,
you would need to nationalise
and
it.
the oil was one of the biggest narratives for supporting independence. Like, oh,
Mhm.
we'll be able to survive on our own because we have all this oil, and actually 98% of it is sold to private European
Yeah,
EU companies. So, um, if you think that we'd be able to survive economically, like what reasons do you have for that?
I certainly. I think every country could survive in terms of whether you would have the same standard of living is something that's set up for debate. Scotland's got a lot of problems, as you'll probably know. I mean, the biggest landowner in Scotland is a very wealthy Norwegian family.
Hmm.
So there would have to be massive, massive land reform. Certainly, when you go out to the islands, out Rothesay way and then up to the north, a lot of that's privately owned by foreign-based people. So yeah, that's going to bring its own problems. Obviously, as you know, Scotland's got a massive drug problem.
Yes.
It is very much a concern because there's a lot of people that is affected by that. You know, certain places you go to, Peterhead and stuff like that, very, very grim with the drug situation. Obviously, you're in Dundee, that's had its own drug situation for a very, very long time.
Well, yeah,
So,
Dundee is the drug death capital of Europe. So
yeah,
out of
that's
all
right.
the cities in Europe, Dundee has per capita the highest drug death in
Yeah,
the entirety of Europe. So
aye. So, as I'm not saying there's not internal problems there that wouldn't, it doesn't get fixed overnight. This whole idea of this utopianism, oh, the very next day we'll start pumping this black gold, and we'll have this and we'll have that. And no, that's not how it works. And you've still got such a close bond with England. My feeling on it was always the two main points that I made was that you've got to go into the unknown. That is very, very true. A lot of the oil in Scotland that would have benefited this, Thatcher used for all her crap. Could we have made that used to benefit us? And I feel it could have. Maybe that time, like, you're kind of past that point where it would make that kind of difference. I certainly wouldn't say that, like I say, that it would automatically solve everything if we break away from England. But my viewpoint on it always was the government in Westminster can't possibly view us as a priority and act accordingly, because their biggest constituency is England, as that returns our most votes, and that totally makes sense. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense for them to do that, but also by the same token, well, it doesn't do us very, very good.
No, yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's two things I want to say there. So yeah, you mentioned like there's most of the land in Scotland is owned by foreign, kind of very private families, or corporations. So I completely, if we were to have like a socialist movement and that a kind of socialist independent Scotland was on the table, I would maybe consider reconsidering and supporting it, because then the situation that I myself just criticised independence with, the 98% of our oil fields being owned by private investors, that wouldn't be a thing if we had a socialist party in charge. 100% of that oil would be owned by the state, by a worker state, and we would get to enjoy all the fruits of that labour. So that would be very, very different. And like the Scots industry, the Scotch whisky kind of industries, are viewed nationally and obviously outweighed as very bourgeois. It's very middle class, very privileged, and it's an expensive thing to get into. If we were under a kind of a socialist government, maybe whiskey can be proletarianized. It can be proletarianized under the state of a socialist system, where it's actually more affordable, and that could be very easily a massive industry, an export for Scotland and independent Scotland. But so I definitely see that. But I just can't kind of understand the feasibility behind that. That is obviously, like you keep saying, very utopian. It's a very utopian idea that the next day Scotland will be like the socialist independent republic and we'll be doing our own thing. That won't happen. There'll be a massive adjustment period, and the SNP will still be there. And the second biggest party in Scotland is the Conservative Party now. The Labour Party are pretty much irrelevant in Scotland. They've been completely wiped out, and that's because they're not strong in any ideas. They've pandered to the identity politics left. They've pandered to the woke left for way too long.
To be fair, the SNP unfortunately do that as well, actually, to probably a bigger extent.
Oh, absolutely. The hate speech crime, the hate speech bill.
Yeah.
That was introduced at a British level. England eventually, thankfully, rejected it. Scotland didn't. They were like, hell yeah, let's get this hate speech bill, which criminalises bad ideas.
I know about Maria Miller. I followed her case. It's turned out well for her, but and she's got a disabled child. She's getting dragged through the court system and all that because she basically won't say, or she wouldn't stop saying a basic truth. It was like, no, trans women are men. She has got the right to say that, and the fact that she's dragged through the courts for saying that is ridiculous, because you can't force somebody to believe something that they don't believe in at their heart, if you know what I mean. And wasting all the amount of resources that you're wasting dragging this woman through court for 2 years is astonishing.
Complete waste of resources.
It's a complete waste of resources, especially considering the violent crime that we have. I mean, Glasgow's a violent city. Dundee can be a very violent city. Certain parts of Edinburgh, I mean, it's rife throughout. And I think your resources are better spent on proper crime, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I think criminalizing people and punishing people for having wrong ideas or ideas that go against like the liberal democratic kind of style is fascistic. Now, although the woke left and the liberals always want to label us communists as fascist, and they equate us as being the same thing, whole horseshoe theory. It's
Horseshoe theory.
absolute bullshit. The woke left are the fascists by labeling everybody that they don't like as being fascists. It's the liberals and the woke left and the cancel culture mobs that want to ban books and deplatform people and cancel people and shut down opposition. It's inherently fascistic, the ideology. So I mean, and the whole kind of LGBT and trans thing. Just most workers are not interested in it.
No,
It's not a
certainly not
matter of being
globally.
for or against it, or being supportive, or being progressive or conservative. It has nothing to do with that. It's just as a communist to look at it from a materialist and scientific standpoint. It's just not really something that we need to waste so much effort and time discussing. People are who they are, and that's fine. And I want people to be treated. I want everybody to be treated with dignity and respect and stuff, obviously. But there's a line, and if you cross the line, I'm sorry, but communists shouldn't have to take you seriously. We want to attract workers, and like establishment disliker here says, we have to promote free speech. Even communists, we have to promote free speech, even if those opinions are wrong or backwards. People should still be able to say them.
There's certainly a problem with this new, whatever you want to call it, like, because people have different ways of describing it, but let's use woke culture. And this, it's into everything now. It's into the school system. It's like, well, we have to have this many people in this kind of movie of colour and this, that, next thing, and a straight cis woman can't play a trans woman, and you're like, that you do know that that's called acting. Like Oscar, the guy who portrayed Oscar Schindler in Schindler's List wasn't a German Jew or a Nazi officer. It's called acting.
Precisely,
so like, and then the shouting down at people constantly, and you're like, look, because even on the page, like, I don't mind people having a back and forth and a yin yang, but when you find the pro cancel or woke left, whatever you want to call them, start piling in, they can be really, really vicious. To a point where they're just constantly shouting and name calling, and you will do this and you're this, and it's like, right, nah, my dude, right, be gone now. Like, we can sit here and argue till we're blue in the face, but you're loving comments about assault and TERFs and all that, and we all know that usually means women. Look at the way they treat J.K. Rowling, etc., just for saying something. Can't try to cancel her for her own bit of work that got so many millions of kids into reading. Like, give my head peace. Like, it's and Scotland is very bad for that kind of thing as well. I think that's why it's maybe taking root in Scotland, because, as you know yourself, people, for God's sake, the football culture in the country is just shouting abuse at each other on a Saturday, and giving each other abuse online, and you're a Fenian this, and you're an orange that, and you're a fucking spoon burning hib bastard, and you hear it all. You know this yourself. And it's like,
Scotland can be a very violent place, and there's lots of. We're always up for a fight. We're always up to shout at each other and argue. Like, that's just Scottish culture. We love
a scrap.
We do love a scrap. Yeah, we do. We do indeed, definitely. But yeah, no, I appreciate you saying all those things. I mean, it's a breath of fresh air to speak to somebody that's just sane. Just that actually is interested in working class issues, and isn't going to pander to like this delusional pseudoscience, which is harmful and just really, really awful stuff. But going back to the issue at hand, Scottish independence, you've given me 2 or 3 reasons why you're for it. One of them being obviously the first past the post system, and how Scotland just isn't really listened to at an electoral level. And I mean, I agree with that analysis. Scotland, Britain can't be classed as a democratic society when Wales and Scotland, which are apparently equal parts of it, are not listened to at literally every election. Not very fair. But I've got a list of a few things here why I am against it. And one of the main reasons is the resolution that the CPGBML passed, the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, and they back in 2014. Wrote a resolution like they always do. They're a very democratic centralist party. They had a vote on it, and they passed this resolution. And I'm not going to read it. I don't have to read it. It's just literally a list. Don't worry. But their main idea is that we should reject national separatism. We should reject kind of bourgeois national separatism, especially when it harms class solidarity. I mean, it's inherently wrong. I mean, Scottish workers have more in common with English workers than we do both of our own bourgeois ruling classes. You know, the SNP is just as bourgeois as the Conservative Party in England. They're both ruling classes, and neither are really representative of the actual working class people. And I think that to divide Britain into Scotland and England will weaken the entire organisational ability of the British working class, but strengthen the ruling class's ability. Because at the end of the day, an independent Scotland will not be an anti-imperialist state. It will still be an imperialist state. In fact, Nicola Sturgeon is quite openly more imperialistic than the Conservative parties. If it was up to Nicola Sturgeon, she would have had troops in Syria fighting against the Assad government directly. Like, she would have had Scottish troops there. She's very, very imperialistic. So it would strengthen the Western kind of liberal hegemony, and it would weaken the British working class. And I think that would be a shame, because if you look at the history of Britain, Britain was one of the first capitalist nations. And hence, from the analysis, I know we didn't want to get theoretical, but I mean, in Stalin's Marxism and the National Question, nations only started to exist with the development of capitalism, for many reasons, many criteria. So Britain, by that definition, by a Marxist definition, Britain was one of the first nations to ever exist. They were the first country to develop capitalism, and ever since that point, sorry, the comment got me off guard. Ever since that point, we've been a unified kind of working class. Sorry, this is the thanks, Dust. Do you kind of, yeah.
Stereotypes of Scottish people. Well, obviously, Groundskeeper Willie's in the exact same cartoon, but we just laugh about it because it's actually hilarious. We don't even know where he's from. We think he's from Aberdeen one minute and Glasgow the next, but a funny character. I don't think you'll find a lot of Scottish people that take offence with caricatures of Scottish people. That's just, we're a very dark-humoured, very love our dark humour, and certainly I find the caricatures of Scottish people and lots of cartoons and all that, I just find them hilarious because we're always kilt wearing, scrappy, shitey down in a bar fight, alcoholics, and it's like, yeah, that's quite funny. Yeah, all fishermen, and what was it? It used to be, it was you're just all fishermen and farmers, and you're like, well, it's quite funny.
Not far off the truth. Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. Stereotypes are based from some sort of truth. It's not all truth, obviously, it's exaggerated, but I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, Willie, the groundskeeper, his accent is obviously awful, but
yeah,
from a character's perspective, he is pretty representative of Scottish people. He's very aggressive, likes to shout, he's very passionate.
Yeah, and a lot of these people, it's not actual Indian people that was ever offended by that, or you couldn't find one, because they would just laugh at it the exact same way. And it's like, well, yeah, it's America. Indian guys running 7-Elevens. That is a joke. Just because they call it the Quickie Mart, what they mean is it's a 7-Eleven, and you usually get the funny Indian guy running it. So yeah, that's called observational humour, and it's quite funny. So
the only people that take offence to this kind of stuff is like white liberals. There's these white liberals who are taking offence on other people's behalf, and it's like, just grow up, like, just calm down. You know, life doesn't have to be this fucking stressful if you don't make it.
Like,
just laugh it off. It's comedy. It's supposed to be funny. Laugh and move on. Like, don't be like, oh my god, you can't say that about Indians. Like, if you spoke to an actual Indian person about what they thought about The Simpsons, they'd be like, oh yeah, Mr. Apu, he's really, really funny. It's like, well,
there's a lot of Indians.
It's an observational comedy.
There's a lot of Indians in Britain, and I highly doubt any of them would get offended. In fact, I think to this day, India's the largest minority population in Great Britain. So, like, white Brits, and then I think it's Indians that are then the most common, like, minority, if you want to call them that.
Yeah.
So, like, we know Indian culture over here because we love an Indian. There's more Indian restaurants than you know what to do with. I certainly love my Indian. I certainly love my Indian food. There's an Indian takeaway in every small hamlet. All the way throughout Scotland, you'll find an Indian takeaway. So
if anybody ever comes to Scotland, you will find an Indian restaurant or an Indian takeaway pretty much on every single high street in every town, village, and city in Scotland. They'll be there somewhere. They're not hard to find.
No, definitely not. Anyway, going back to what you were saying, I certainly get that point. You know, dividing's never a good thing. I don't think. I've just, in my personal opinion, I've just not seen enough evidence that England's ready to make that step. John McClain observed that the first one of the First World War, and it's basically like Mr. Lenin's been given an incorrect idea of how close Britain is to accepting communism. It's nowhere near it. So if Mr. Lenin's been fed ideas by the Communist Party of Great Britain or whoever it was at the time, that's Britain's on the cusp of turning towards communism, they'll be the next ones they'll be the first big nation to turn. And he's like, no, that's not the case. You're not observing actual fact here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so, I think Britain, even though, I mean, it kind of goes against Marxist analysis, really, actually, which is upsetting. But I mean, yeah, even though Britain was one of the first capitalist nations, and then thus should be one of the first socialist states, from Marxist analysis, I just don't see. I disagree with that Marxist analysis, seeing how things have turned out, because Britain has such a strong colonial and imperialist history. They are inherently anti-capitalist, and I think the closest that Britain has or Scotland has ever been to achieving socialism was in 1919 during Red Clydeside, when ship workers during the war. Well, when soldiers had came back from World War One and they realised that everything that the government promised them hadn't happened. They weren't given better housing. They were still living in slums. Rents, because rent was owned by obviously private landlords, as it still is now.
And Barber's famous rent strikes had happened, and I'm sure the men didn't know about that until they returned. When the bailiffs were trying to come in team-handed, and she organised the rent strikes and stuff like that. In fact, I'll give you something. I don't know if you've heard of a band, they're Scottish, called The Wakes. If you go and give a listen to their albums, one of their albums has got a song about the Red Clydeside and the rent strikes.
Really?
They're very good. They're actually quite popular.
I listened to them, but I wasn't aware of that song. Yeah.
Well, what album is that on? That album's on the third album. Is the album's called Vanceramos. You can get it on Spotify or whatever, or you could look it up on YouTube. Just look up the Wakes, Red Clydeside, and John McClain's March. They do songs all about this very period that we're currently speaking about. They're friends of mine. So if you check out something like that, you'll enjoy it. I think it's something that you wouldn't find in a lot of places singing about that part of Scottish history. Certainly.
Yeah. I mean, so what happened? Like, the kind of history was during the war. I mean, about a year. The last year of the war, 1918, women started going on rent strikes. And then when the men came home from the war, they realised that obviously the government hadn't done anything that they promised. So they actually joined the strikes, and they went on a general strike, an industrial strike, where they walked out of their workplaces. And it got so bad, there was tens of thousands of people on the streets in Glasgow. And it reached other cities too. There was strikes in Dundee and in Perthshire, and even up north in the fishing villages, Findochty and Finnechty and Inverness. There was strikes even there. And it got so bad, and the British government were so terrified of a workers' uprising that Scottish soldiers were actually locked in their barracks.
That's right.
And English troops were sent up in tanks to suppress the Scottish workers. But by the time these on you go.
I think we're getting about a bad line here. Sorry, my signal's a wee bit funny. I think the idea behind that was, well, if we let the Scottish troops out, they might very well turn their guns and actually join the strike.
They might be sympathetic to the strikes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely. So, and then by the time the English troops had reached Glasgow to brutally suppress that rising, cities in England started rising up, and that's another reason why I'm against independence. There's always been a sense of class solidarity between Scottish and English workers. By the time the English troops had went up to suppress the Glaswegians in Manchester, in Birmingham, in London, in Newcastle, in Middlesbrough, there was not Middlesbrough. That's Scotland. The other one, I can't remember what it's called, but up north in England, all these industrial cities in England, tens of thousands of workers there had went on strike as well to join in and show solidarity towards the Scottish workers. So there's always been that sense of class solidarity, and the English workers saw what was happening in Glasgow and was like, we need to take advantage of this. And those strikes lasted until 1921, and they were actually successful because the British government actually ended up giving in to the strike's demands, and they pretty much tore down all of the slum housing in Scotland at the time and built up these new affordable homes for ex-veterans to live in. And I mean, it was okay. It was still substandard housing for the working class. Nothing like luxurious or anything, but it was better than slums. They had their own places. Nice cat, by the way.
Oh yeah, sorry, he's up looking for some attention, so I've got to give him it.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Awesome. But yeah. So there's always been that sense of class solidarity, and just kind of like, fuck it, like it's just politics. Human beings should be more than politics, and if English workers are experiencing the same shitty kind of societal material conditions as the Scottish people, then we should support the Scottish people in their demands and hope that they support the English demands when the next time they go on strike. That happened during the Thatcher era, when Thatcher closed down the mines. The Welsh workers went on strike. Scottish and English workers, in their droves, took trains and buses to Wales to join in on the strikes, and that caused a widespread general strike again. Thatcher ended up having to give in. Like we have such a strong working class history in Britain, of just class solidarity and sticking up for each other. And
a lot of the problem we might have now, as kind of Thatcher's ideas kind of worked out, a lot of people very well might be sympathetic to such things, but I believe the biggest thing is now they've got these mortgage debt traps constantly around their neck. I mean, I see where I stay nearby, Glen Mavis, Hollytown, Carnbro. I mean, these are all just down the road for me, and it's these big 4-bedroom houses and stuff like that. Very little amenities, and it's costing like the list price is like 282. And people's obviously having to pay over that, and then they're having to get some places like the Halifax are organising so that you can have a 37-year mortgage. So what kind of pressure does that put on you then if you want to go and strike for better paying conditions? You're like, oh well, wait a minute, I've got this mortgage payment every month at however much it is plus utilities, and I'm going to take like a week off or whatever to go and join in strike action. I think unfortunately that's where the genius Mrs. Thatcher came in. Evil genius, but genius nonetheless, because if you wanted to break the backs of the working class, saddle them with more debt than what they really should be handling.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I think that is an enduring legacy, and it's like I say, it's evil genius, but it's genius nonetheless. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Well, another housing problem I've seen in Scotland is pretty much no affordable housing being built. And everywhere, like the cities are getting bigger, even in Dundee. If you drive outskirts in Dundee, it's mainly countryside. But you see all these massive like housing construction sites where they're building these houses. But these houses are not affordable homes. These are like 3 to 4 bedroom houses. It's privately made. It's made by private kind of landlords and stuff. And you have to kind of buy it, and you have to bid and stuff. There's a complete lack of affordable housing, and so the cities are getting overcrowded, and yet the outskirts of every city there are these whole swathes of suburbs and stuff and cul-de-sacs getting made, but no one is buying them because nobody can afford it. So every single time this new construction site is made, it's only got about 50% capacity. 50% of the houses are vacant because there's not enough people buying them. Whereas then every single kind of proposal that like council, maybe you can make some more council affordable homes in the city. They're like, nah, they just buy it up to private investors and make it. They build all these fancy houses in the middle of the city, and then people who live in the city can't afford to live there because you have to fucking it's private. It's just that's another thing I've seen. It's a massive problem in Scottish society.
I'm in the central belt, and certainly a lot of the places I see. Actually, just off the old roundabout at the M8 where you go for the showcase, I think it comes under Bishop Briggs, and the size of that place that they've built, and there's not one shop or one swing park in this whole complex, and it goes on for miles, and the plots are bought or bid on, hence bought, before they've even been built. I've certainly seen that in the one at Brigade, where it was a new plots, and it was like, say it was 15 plots. Plot 1 sold, plot 2 sold, and this is only the frame going up. This is only the timber frame going up. So you've had it like bought and sold before you've even got anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. You see it all the time. Even when I take the
William, I do hate to be rude. My Wayne's mum has been messaging me on WhatsApp for something important she's saying.
Okay.
So she's usually not that insistent. So I'm going to have to maybe cut it short here, and we'll maybe need to pick it up another time. But I wouldn't cut the discussion short. I've been having a lot of fun with it, but I need to cut it short because I wouldn't do it for any other reason. But my kid's mum has phoned me and been insistent that she speaks to me. So I do apologise.
Family comes first. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, and it was good having the discussion, and I think we should pick it up again another time as well, because I felt as if we were still getting into the meat and gravy of that there. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't feel as if it's been an hour. So
next time we do it, we'll just jump straight into the actual.
Jump straight in and pick up where we left off, and hopefully all the guys enjoyed part 1, and hopefully we can arrange plan again at another time as well.
No worries, man. Just wait. I'll continue after you go. So you just leave. That's fine.
No problem. Thank you very much. It was good talking to you.
That's okay. Obviously, family comes first. Family is much more important than politics, and absolutely, we'll definitely pick it off next time. We'll pick it up where we left off. We'll definitely have a round 2. I think we're just about to get into like the meaty part, the tense part of discussing Scottish independence, but that's fine. So I guess we're already an hour in, so I'm probably going to wrap it up soon anyway. So yeah, that's fine. Thank you for watching the live stream, I'll please watch part 2. Hopefully part 2 will be a lot more meatier and a lot more juicier stuff, and we'll be continuing to talk about Scottish independence. And please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it around. It would be greatly appreciated. So thank you, and have a nice night. Cheerio.